this point onwards, we'll know whether...
The next generation, your children and grandchildren, do better.
Hardships, sleeping in corridors, and enduring hydrogen.
Things fall apart and the center cannot hold, lest anarchy is loose upon the land. Who can but remember the first lines of Irish poet William Butler Yeats' popular poem, The Second Coming? The guns have stopped quaking across Mali, and the guns hopefully should stop in Syria at midnight Tuesday. But it is an uncertain future that awaits both countries. The Tuaregs in Mali have closed the chapter on their swift-moving rebellion, not because of persuasion, but because their primary objective has been achieved, the establishment of the Republic of Azawad, which was previously northern Mali. I am Adeogun Philips, and this is Global Perspectives. It is a travesty that the sovereignty that the Captain Sanogo-led junta sought to protect when it toppled the President Amani Toumani Touré's government has been the first casualty. For the rebels, the Republic of Azawad is no longer a pipe dream, but a reality. For half a century they dreamed of the Republic of Azawad. Now it has happened in accidental circumstances. In what has been the swiftest revolution towards the formation of a country, the Tuaregs have achieved a monumental feat.
Nous n'avons pas pris langue avec la CEDEAO, nous entendons son discours et nous sommes tout à fait ouverts à toutes les tentatives, enfin toutes les démarches de négociation à travers la CEDEAO, à travers un autre organisme, à travers les grandes puissances. Et nous sommes tout à fait ouverts actuellement, mais nous n'avons...
This republic faces a tumultuous beginning. Chaos best describes the situation in Bamako and the rest of southern Mali. 2 weeks after the unpopular takeover, the military junta have yet to win new friends. Rather, it is a barrage of criticism and sanctions. Malians have yet to unify as a single force in pressing for the return to civil rule. Before the coup, there was already growing disaffection on the streets. Many had looked ahead with trepidation towards the April 29 presidential poll. With the thoughts of election now pushed aside, the question was for how long can the heavily import-driven countries take out?
La sanction elle est très forte et même démesurée. Parce qu'en prenant cette sanction, ce n'est pas seulement contre les putschistes, et c'est contre toute la population malienne et qui est déjà appauvrie avec le problème de guerre du Nord. Ça ne peut que renforcer cette situation de faiblesse ou de pauvreté du Mali.
4 days. Yes, 4 days was all that was required for Captain Sanogo and his lieutenants to hand over to an interim government. The Economic Community of West African States had been the most vocal in demanding for Captain Sanogo to hand over. At least 3,000 troops are reportedly being prepped up for an impending attack whenever sanctioned.
Je vous invite, au nom du président en exercice de la CEDEAO et au nom de l'ensemble des chefs d'État et de gouvernement de notre organisation, à préparer à leur attention un plan d'action opérationnel de déploiement de la force en attente de la CEDEAO, assorti d'un calendrier et d'un budget pour les actions concrètes qui seront menées.
Like Côte d'Ivoire, France has taken the middle ground in this crisis, preferring dialogue rather than force. Seeking a mandate at the United Nations Security Council will be a Herculean task, with the crisis in the northern part of the country still ongoing. Charles Adeogun Philips is an international lawyer and a former genocide and war crimes prosecutor. In 2001, he was appointed senior trial attorney and lead counsel at the United Nations International Criminal Court for Rwanda. In 10 years, he has prosecuted 12 genocide trials before an international court. Hello, Charles.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, nice to have you on Global Perspectives. A group of young soldiers thought it upon themselves that they wanted to bring about peace in their country. They wanted to bring about stability. They were patriotic people in some sense. But in 2 weeks, you have Captain Sanogo and his lieutenants have brought Mali from point, let's say 50 to ground level right now. And they have decided to hand over to an interim government that will run affairs for the next period in time. We don't know exactly when they will hand over to this interim government, but the consequences of their action have been grave. What's your reaction to what's going on in Mali?
It was unfortunate that in this day and age, members of the military would consider staging a coup d'etat. Clearly, coup d'etats have become extremely unfashionable on the continent, or indeed the subcontinent. But I applaud the response of the international community, and even more so, I applaud the response of ECOWAS. And as a regional body, ECOWAS has been extremely robust in its response to this sort of matters. You and I remember what happened in the Ivory Coast when Laurent Gbagbo refused to surrender to the incumbent president. And ECOWAS was very, very forthright. And clearly, this whole resolution has come under the auspices of ECOWAS. And clearly, it sends a very strong signal that this sort of thing would not be tolerated in this part of the world. And I'm very happy that there's been a speedy resolution, as you said, 2 weeks.
We all knew there will be consequences if this sort of thing happened, but we did not think that the rebellion going on in the north of the country would give birth to a new republic as quickly as it did. There's a Republic of Azawad as we speak, and they have celebrated their independence, even though they haven't been recognized by any country whatsoever. But it is a real situation we are facing now. They have carved out their own country. What do we do? Are we going to sit back and wait, or this troops that ECOWAS is planning to go in, how successful do you think the mission can be?
Well, it will be peace building as opposed to peacekeeping. There's a bit of difference in terms of international relations. It would probably be a mission to actually assess how volatile the situation is over there. We saw how long it took in the case of Sudan and Southern Sudan, where a similar thing happened over the last few years, and there's going to be a lot of dialogue. I think before we get to the stage whereby states are being recognized by the international community, there's going to be a lot of dialogue to kind of reabsorb them into the mainframe, as it were. And without actually speculating as to how this is going to pan out, one looks forward to a speedy resolution, and a very sensible one as well.
These MNLA, the group who formed this republic, have been fighting for this for about 50 years, nearly half a century. You have small groups who are fighting for such things all around the continent, who want their own independence. You look at such groups and they say, this is what we want to achieve, and they finally get it, by some stroke of luck, accident as it appears, and they're there now. You think whoever is in charge is going to just give away what they have like that without a fight?
Well, the Gao area is a very significant part of Mali. It's the historical part of Mali. I think they might end up doing the sort of thing that Tanzania did with Zanzibar, where the two countries, so to speak, may stand side by side, but form a united government. I think that's how the Zanzibarians and the Tanzanians work. It's a country within a country, as it were. It's a little too early to actually speculate as to how this is going to be resolved, and it will be interesting to actually see in the coming days and weeks how this resolves itself, as it were.
Yes, I did listen to some of the statements coming from the rebel group, and they said that we do not want Al-Qaeda to infiltrate our territory? Because we know that AQIM does have some operations within the splinter groups around that area.
Yes.
We do not want them to come and infiltrate what is going on here. This is our victory. This is our independence. Would you think there's going to be some concerted international effort, knowing what is happening in the Sahel region, Mauritania, Niger, Chad, Nigeria? You have Al-Qaeda splinter groups here and there roaming around. Do you think they would want to come in and say, let us try and bring some order in the Sahel region?
I think security and peace in the Sahel region is of mutual interest to the international community as a whole. I think that Mauritania has experienced some volatility in the last few months, and everyone is a little, because of its proximity to Europe, everyone is looking very carefully at what happens in that region. In relation to Mali, one doesn't really know. I mean, you also have to bear in mind that there's been a regime change in Senegal as well. And Senegal is very close to Mali. And at some stage, one can only thank God that the Senegalese post-election matter was resolved very, very speedily, because that may have also spilled into the ongoing conflict in the northern region of Mali, because that's actually the access point from Mali into Senegal. So it's actually very tense in the whole region at the moment. Of course, it will be of concern to the international community as a whole that whole region, the Sahel region, is actually very secure, because, as you rightly said, Al-Qaeda and activities in Yemen have been known to use people like the Tuaregs and people from that whole Sahel region to further their activity. So, of course, you are right. It's very sensitive.
Kofi Annan is no Tom Cruise, but Mission Impossible best describes the nature of his mediatory role in this Syrian crisis. You see, he is familiar with this sort of sticky situations. 5 years ago, he stepped into the dividing line between Mwai Kibaki and Raila Odinga when post-election violence threatened to bring Kenya to a civil war. At exactly 12 midnight today, all of Mr. Annan's work on Syria will be put to the fire and
just
better come out unscathed. His mission has been tagged the last chance for Syria. Mr. Annan's plan requires a monumental miracle to succeed. In over a year, President Bashar Assad has defied threats, sanctions, or humanitarian crisis. Instead, he has bombarded opposition towns and refused to hold talks with the rebels. And so, with fingers crossed, everyone is asking the same question. Can Bashar Assad be trusted to stop the tanks from rolling on? This is how the ceasefire timetable looks like. On Tuesday, April 12th at exactly 12 midnight, the Syrian government must withdraw troops and heavy weapons such as tanks from towns, cities and villages. The following 48 hours, the ceasefire must be implemented on the ground with the onus on the opposition to follow the government's lead. By 6 a.m. local time on 12th of April, all forms of violence must be stopped on all sides. Afterwards, all parties will hold talks on the political solution. Straightforward it seems, but the situation remains dicey.
On the 10th of April is that the Syrian government will have completed its withdrawal from populated centers, the withdrawal of military units from populated centers, that it will have stopped moving any military units into cities.
But even with the Tuesday deadline closing in fastly, the violence continues unabated. On Saturday, Syrian activists said 24 people had been killed in renewed fighting in Syria. Activists say they died when Syrian government forces attacked Latamer, a suburb of Hama. Some reports suggest 27 people had been killed there also. The United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon was reading many minds when he said the agreed 10th of April ceasefire deadline was not an excuse for continued killing. Turkey has been particularly critical of President Assad. Several Syrians have escaped fighting into Turkey, and Ankara appears to be feeling the refugee strain on its economy.
Syrian government's acceptance of the joint special envoy's plan of initial proposals to resolve the crisis, the violence and assaults in civilian areas have not stopped. The situation on the ground continues to deteriorate. Violence should have stopped months ago. Indeed, it never should have started, particularly since it was unleashed in response to the legitimate demands of the Syrian people, the same demands that people across the Arab world have been making for more than a year now.
In the eye of the storm is President Assad, who must now meet with his enemies going by Mr. Annan's plan. While President Assad has insisted on crushing the opposition has only wished one thing: the downfall of the Assad regime. If Mr. Annan is to stand a chance of producing a peaceful political solution, he would have to persuade the Saudis, Qataris and other key players in the Arab League and indeed the West that pushing for regime change is going to plunge Syria and the region into deeper chaos.
It remains to be seen. The 6-point plan of Mr. Annan seems realistic. The first point basically is to create an enhanced dialogue amongst all the actors. The second is to ensure the ceasefire by the 10th of April, the military cessation of fire and a complete ceasefire 48 hours later. The third is to open a humanitarian corridor for aid to access the victims of this tragedy, and also to enable safe passage for journalists like yourself without interference from the government, which is the fifth point, and the sixth is to allow freedom of association. And of course, there's one more: the release of political detainees. All 6 points seem realistic. It remains to be seen whether or not the government of Syria will actually fulfill their obligations under the agreement. As you said, Bashar Assad has indeed indicated that he's willing, but that the other side, the opposition, must be willing to play their part as well.
When these two groups, as Bashar Assad and the opposition, get to meet, they will meet at the table. It will be the first time they're going to be exchanging ideas and discussing. It's never happened yet. And you look at the period to the build-up to this point in time, where we've been having reports of people being killed in homes and in many of the opposition towns for a period in time. It's gone on over and over again.
Indeed.
Yes, and suddenly you get the feeling, can this be stopped? Can Bashar Assad pull the tanks away and say, we are not going to attack these towns again? It doesn't seem to be any indication that probably would happen.
Well, it's yes and no. There are a combination of factors. Kofi Annan is in the unenviable position of representing the UN and also the Arab League. The focus of the Arab League and the desires of the Arab League is slightly different from that of the UN. As you know, the Arab League is pro-regime change. They are pro-military intervention, and they don't necessarily want to encourage any dialogue. Annan's 6-point plan is totally opposed to that, and he has to find a balance between what the Arab League and Arab states want, what the UN want, and what especially Russia and China want. And as you know, in the last UN resolution, the Security Council resolution in aid of regime change, that resolution was actually vetoed by Russia and China.
Yeah, but you know, this began with the UN Security Council move to try and seek for a regime change.
Yes.
And then eventually that didn't happen. We get watered down to this ceasefire 6-point plan, which isn't as powerful as we expected it to be to bring about the change. Somehow get that feeling that President Assad is looking back and saying, These guys can't get me out of this place, so I'm going to dig in deeper and frustrate whatever move it is to bring about a political change?
Geographically, Syria is in a very interesting position in the world. In the Middle East, their neighbors are extremely jittery about instability in Syria. We have Turkey there, and we know what the problems in Turkey. Turkey has its own problems. And Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon as well are extremely jittery about the prospect of a humanitarian crisis. Only recently, the Prime Minister of Turkey had made representation to Ban Ki-moon about the influx of refugees across the border into Turkey. So Syria is in a very interesting position geographically, based on its proximity to Israel, to Lebanon, and areas that are extremely sensitive, and care must be taken in the resolution of any dispute within Syria.
Good. You look at some of these crimes that have been alleged to have been committed in Syria. They are grievous crimes, crimes we can't just wish away. You look through the 6-point plan. There's very little mention of what would happen to anyone who's committed some of these crimes. No one is talking about President Assad facing the war crimes for what is going on in his country. What's going on?
Well, I always say to people that there's an apparent conflict between the need for peace and security in the world and the need for justice. And sometimes you have to see how far you can get in relation to creating an enabling environment for peace and security, and then deal with the justice issues. The only prospect, and there's been talk of the Syrian situation being referred to the International Criminal Court. Syria itself is not a state party of the International Criminal Court. As you know, only state parties of the International Criminal Court can refer matters to it. Beyond that, the only other method of referral would be a Security Council referral. Now, if the Security Council were to refer the matter to the ICC, as they did in the case of Sudan or indeed Libya, then you can be rest assured that China and Russia will veto that resolution. And so there will be no resolution to the ICC. And that's really the legal impediment. That's the legal impediment to an ICC referral. The veto power that China and Russia would have on the Security Council. Being permanent members of the Security Council, they're able to veto resolutions, and therefore there will be no referral to the ICC. And that's why you can't have that.
Thank you once again, Charles.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Well done. On my way out. If I said the name Rising Webster Thumb, you wouldn't raise an eyebrow. But if I said Bingu wa Mutharika, then I've got your attention. The same man, yes, the very same man, Malawi's late president and former AU chairman Bingu wa Mutharika, was controversial in his final years as president. Every successive year from 2004, when he was first elected, was stormier than the previous. In 2005, he left the ruling party and formed his own party, and then his troubles began. His former friends became his enemies. His mentor, former President Bakili Muluzi, cut off ties with him, and 4 years later, he fell off with Vice President Joyce Banda. But the top of the pie was a diplomatic row with the United Kingdom. Exactly 1 year to his death, he sent packing the UK envoy because he said President Mutharika wasn't open to criticism. Mr. Cameron asked for an explanation, and President Mutharika said, "Go to hell." The UK calmly and coldly ended its assistance package to Malawi, nearly bankrupting Malawi in less than 12 months. With his passing away, maybe this opens a new window for reconciliation or more internal chaos. The moral here is power must always be balanced by responsibility, otherwise it is tyranny. I am Adeogun Philips, and that's the way we do it. Thank you for watching.
And the security forces, this is how far they have come. From this point onwards, we will know whether
next generation, your children and grandchildren, do better.
Hardships, sleeping in corridors, and enduring hydrogen.